guys, welcome to the 321 Leadership Podcast with me, Pastor Jeff. I am so grateful that you're investing a little bit of time into this lesson with me. I'm so grateful. I have been getting so much good feedback from you guys. I've had so many people just say, hey, like this is changing my life. I've had some people, ministry leaders from other ministries, talk about how it's helping them in their leadership in their organizations. And even people who aren't in leadership roles yet are learning how to lead their own lives better. So thank you guys for the feedback. If you haven't already, please like, please comment, please share. It helps me so much when you do that. And I'm so appreciative of it. Today, what I want to do is first, I want to tell you every podcast is designed to do a couple things. Number one, I believe Jesus is and was the greatest leader of all time. And I think when our goal is to honor Jesus and grow as a leader, I think we actually become a little bit more Christ-like along the way. And what I want to do is I want to help you have a clear definition of leadership. And I want you to help you find the ceiling of your current leadership and break through it to find a whole new level of leadership that you never knew was possible. That's my goal. What is leadership? Leadership is taking people someplace you're already going. And one of the absolutely most important things to do to lead well is what? Delegation. Delegation is such a funny topic to me. If you don't mind me getting kind of goofy with you for a few minutes, I think of delegation as common sense now, but I realize when I think about it, I realize how difficult delegation was for me to learn. It was ridiculously difficult for me to learn. Delegation's funny to me because in my leadership, I think about it as common sense now. But when I look at my past, I'm like, it was never common sense for me. For most of my ministry career and most of my life, I've been bad at delegating. And I think this is, for some of you in the business world listening to Delegation Business, this might be helpful to you, but it's really going to be helpful to those in nonprofit, in church ministry, and maybe even your home life. It's like when you hear this, you're like, oh, that's so common sense. But it's like, most people are terrible at delegating. And then when you hear it, you're like, it sounds like common sense, but it's not common among most people to do this. So it's actually uncommon sense, but it will absolutely change your life. It's such an important thing to do. And so to kind of give you some perspective on why delegation is so important is, and honestly, if you want to find a ceiling to break through in your leadership, you need to learn how to delegate and actually just become great at delegating. Kind of an analogy I like to think of. I have my little plant over here, and I have this little plant on my desk with this little plate, and I think about what it's like, what leadership is like. It's honestly it's filling your plate, but then constantly rearranging what's on your plate. And one of my favorite things to do is to go to a Brazilian grill. Man, if you've never been to a Brazilian grill, they have meat skewers and they give you a token or something. It's red means no and green means go. They just bring food to you. Actually, I didn't plan this, but I have a red marker and a green marker on my desk here. And which camera are we on? I think we're on this camera. Green means go and red means no. And as long as you have the green up, they just keep bringing it to you, and you just keep piling fresh meat right onto your plate. And it's my favorite thing. But you eat it and you make room, right? You eat it and make room for some more. And hopefully I'm making you a little hungry for some protein. But leadership, obviously, you don't just consume it, it goes away. Leadership, your plate gets full of responsibilities. And so as your leadership grows, you gain more responsibility or different responsibilities. And so delegation allows you to take what's on your plate that's good and replace it with other things that are better. And to do that, a lot of times, sometimes, and we'll talk about this in another podcast, sometimes things need to be deleted or automated. Shout out Pastor Craig Leadership Podcast. He's got a really good episode on this. Automate, delegate, delete stuff. But right now I just want to talk about delegating. And so sometimes you delete stuff, something's on your plate. It used to be good. It's not good anymore. You get rid of it. But a lot of the stuff that's on your plate is good, but now it gets to a point where it's not good for you, or it could be good for you, but it's not best for you, and it would be good for someone else on your team. And so that's what you need to do. You need to think like, if I don't delegate something, you're going to probably limit your leadership, and you could bottleneck your organization. If you're, especially wherever you're at, if you're higher up in leadership, you bottleneck the organization or your team's growth if you don't delegate. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you how to delegate, and then I'm going to teach you how to delegate. I've got kind of like a two-part how to delegate. So like, how do you decide if you're going to delegate, and then how do you actually delegate it? Does that sound good? If so, type "let's go" with like 5 O's in there in the comments, just to let me know that you're watching this far. And by the way, more comments. I'm getting lots of good feedback. Let's see some more comments in the comment section. All right. So how do we decide if we delegate? First thing you need to do is you need to say, does this need to be done by me, or would it be better suited to be done by someone else? And here's what you need to understand. Your first response is often going to be, well, I could just do it faster. But faster doesn't mean it would be better suited for someone else to do, right? For me, for example, I have a really well-rounded skill set. I've been really blessed to be able to be really eclectic. I've been really blessed to be really eclectic in my capability. And so there was a time when I ran our church social media page. I ran our church website. I invented our first church website, and it was pretty good for a while. I picked the aesthetic of our church facilities and did our design. I did some of our church shopping. And some of the people who are part of my church, they would be frustrated at me if I was doing those things. Why? Because actually they know that someone else should do those things, because I have different responsibilities that they need to be done by me. And that not sharing those responsibilities with them keeps me from doing the other things I need to do. For example, where our ministry is at, my sermon quality needs to be better than it used to be. And I have legitimate members in my congregation. Not that I'm above doing the shopping or social media. I would love to do some of those things. I have members in my congregation who would say, "Pastor, don't you dare be our social media guy. We want you to use time that you have to do stuff like that, writing a really good sermon for us." And so once upon a time, it was good for me to do it. We were a small grassroots organization with no staffing and no resources and few volunteers. And so I did it for a while. And then when the ministry grew, organization grew, it was now better suited for someone else. Now my assistant Sophie is our webmaster, social media master, and my sweet mother-in-law does a weekly shopping trip for church supplies. That's what you need to do. You need to say, is this task best done by me, or would it be better suited for someone else? And it's probably good to occasionally make a list of what are your responsibilities. Like, make a list of top 10 things, 20 things you do on a regular basis. And there's a good chance it was good for you at once upon a time, but maybe your plate's a little full and it would be good for someone else to do it. I'll talk about that in a little bit too. Let me go to the next thing. So number one, does it need to be done by me, or be better suited for someone else? Number two, does keeping it on my plate limit the growth of my team or organization? Here's the thing. Listen to that one more time. Does keeping it on my plate limit the growth of my team or our organization? If I'm handling every detail of our Sunday morning service, I am limiting the leadership development of other people on my team. Most of my examples are church examples. I'm a pastor. There was a time when I would handle every detail of every Sunday service. What happens if I handle every detail of every Sunday service? Well, right now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, between 5 and 7, depending on how you want to break things up. I have between 5 and 7 different people who lead different parts of our Sunday church experience. If I was still managing every single part of it, I would be denying them the ability to grow their teams. Why? I would get in the way. And so early on, I would do lots of different things And I had very few leaders. Now I do very specific things and I have lots of leaders. I have a worship leader who worries about all the worship, all the music, getting the environment of the church, distraction free so people can focus on what they want to focus on. I have a greeting team leader and I have a kitchen team leader. I have two hospitality leaders that are looking at two different types of hospitality. And so I can go on and on and on. And if I continued to oversee every morning, Sunday morning thing, what would happen? Well, I'm denying them the opportunity of growing. And that's going to limit how many teams we can have because I can't manage 5 teams, 7 teams. And so it's really, really, really good. And I want to read one note here for you, just a second, so I can get it just right. If my example is a big example, people on your team might be your next leader. And so if you need to give something to another person on your team because it's getting in the way of your team growing, guess what? The person you're going to delegate to is probably going to be one of your next leaders. And they cause you to get a promotion. You could go from being a leader to a director by giving a few things to that next person who will be your next leader. And then you can maybe develop a couple leaders even to start taking on these things on your team that would be leadership responsibilities. And now you get to be a director overseeing a couple leaders. It's a beautiful thing. So does that make sense? I've got some drastic examples if you want to go a little bit farther. Weddings and funerals. I'm in a season where I'm starting to do less, and maybe very seldom will I be doing weddings and funerals in the future. Why? Because it limits my growth of my organization and my growth of my team. Am I too busy and too do I too busy? Am I too unavailable to do weddings and funerals? Well, I'm probably getting there, but it's not actually about me at all. It's about limiting the growth of my team. So I have 4 pastoral residents who are in training to become ordained pastors in my team, right? And if I continue to do every wedding and every funeral, what limitation am I putting on them? They're never going to learn how to be good at doing weddings and funerals. And we're in a season where we don't have a ton of them. And so I should delegate to them as often as I can so that I have a whole team of pastors who are good at doing weddings and funerals instead of the whole organization only relying on my availability and capability to do weddings and funerals, right? Okay, I've talked about this one long enough, but you do need to start making a shift from getting things done to building a team that gets things done. So number 1 is, does it need to be done by me, or would someone else be better suited to do it? Number 2, does keeping it on my plate limit the growth of my team or organization? And then number 3, is there someone who can do this 70% as well as I can? And there's a lot of margin on here. So the person you hand it off to doesn't need to be able to do it as well as you. If they're 70% as good as you, and then you give them ownership and control after you train them, there's a good probability that they will become 110% as good as you, 200% better than you. I used to be really good at designing websites. And then I delegated that to my dear assistant, Sophie, and spent a lot of time investing in her web page development skills. And now she is 2,000% better at being a webmaster and web designer than I am. She wasn't originally as good at it, but then I spent time teaching her how to do it. And now she's far, far, far exceeded my capability. And I've heard experts say that, if you find someone who can even do it as 60% as well as you, but they have a lot of untapped potential that they just need time and experience, you could delegate it to them just as long as you make sure you give them more coaching and more training to get there. And so it's the long game. Delegating will sometimes take a lot more time for you on the front end, but the future payoff is way worth it. It's way worth it, way worth it, way worth it. Initially, yes, it's inconvenient. because you have to train somebody to do something that you probably, this is one of the reasons people struggle to delegate, is you know how to do it, but often you haven't written down a process or thought of why you do it that way in a way that's clear enough to hand off to somebody. And so you actually have to be more thoughtful and have everything mapped out in order to delegate it well. And so yeah, it's sometimes easier to do it ourselves immediately, but at what cost? Well, the cost is the future excellence that you're missing out on by not delegating. Number 4 is, would passing this off be an investment in someone's calling or personal growth? Ooh, how do you decide if you delegate? Well, if passing it off would be an investment in someone else's calling or personal growth. Ooh, I touched on this a little bit already with some other points I made, but this is really going to go home for you on this note. See, I think one of the reasons delegation seems really unnatural in a ministry environment is because we, how do we say this? We feel like we're being unkind, especially if we're dealing with volunteers. But the reality is there's a good chance that what's leadership? I'm interrupting myself for a minute. What's leadership? Leadership is taking people someplace you're already going. And the people who are under your leadership want to go where you're taking them. And there's a good chance that there's somebody on your team who would happily do part of your responsibility that you would delegate to them. There's somebody on your team who would happily do part of your responsibility because they love you and they're excited to help you take them where you're trying to take them. So they're good chance somebody's delighted to take it. And the reality is the people following your lead, God usually, in my experience, God usually has somebody on your team who has a calling that complements yours. And so somebody who's on your team showing high ownership and they're passionate about what your team's passionate about. Well, there's a good chance God's calling them to more on your team. Like every team probably has some people who maybe aren't high performers and they're going through the motions more than you wish they did. They're still there. They're awesome, but there's also people on your team who have high ownership. And the reality is you might be hindering their calling by not giving them a responsibility that would help them grow in their calling. I don't know if you need an example of that, but I just want you to know that it is not unkind to give responsibility. Let me say it again. It is not unkind to give responsibility to people who God is calling to a responsibility. I could think of so many examples. When I remember, I wasn't always good at this. So I think about when I first delegated small groups to our small group director. I was like, man, this is a lot, but I can't be the small group director anymore. And my plate was too full and that was becoming too big. And honestly, I think it was one of the best things I did for the person who is leading my small group. Shout out to you, Daniel. And yeah, I mean, I think it was a really, 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 really good thing for his life and his ministry. And I could go through just all my different teams, all these different areas, but hopefully this is making sense for you. So let me say it this way. Often we think delegating is unkind because it burdens those who we give responsibility to. But if God is calling somebody to a higher position on the team in the ministry that you're leading, if God is calling somebody to a higher level of responsibility on the team that you're leading, then guess what? It's unkind not to delegate. It's unkind not to give them responsibility if God is calling them. So you got to just make that switch in your mind. It's not unkind to delegate. It's unkind not to delegate if there's someone rising up on your team and you never give them more responsibility. Let's go. What I want to do is I'm going to rapid fire talk to you about how to actually hand it off well. It's one thing to get the concept of why you should delegate, but it's another thing to delegate well. So I'm going to go through these really quick because my goal is 20 minutes or less of your time today. And you're probably not even watching the clock because you're just having such a good time. And so am I. I love doing this for you. But I'm gonna do this rapid fire. So say, let's keep going. If you already made that comment that said, let's go, let's keep going with lots of O's to get to the next level. So I'm going to give you 4 tips on how to hand off well. I'm going to go rapid fire and we're going to have a good time. Number 1, test them out first if they haven't proven themselves yet. Like there's people on your team who you think would maybe be good at the responsibility, but you're not sure. You don't have to just give them the responsibility. You don't have to give them a position or a title right away. Just give them a chance to try something out. It's okay. So test them out. So like maybe you want to give somebody an event or a task to run. Well, don't give them the full event right away and say, hey, I want you to manage this event. Give them a portion of the event and just say, hey, I really appreciate if you would handle this part of the event. Test them out. See how they do. Let them coordinate part of it. Our gospel communities, our small groups do this quite a bit. They're always looking for their number 2, so they can have the next person multiply the next group. And so a lot of times what they'll do is you'll kind of test out the people in the group that feel like they could handle a group well, by letting them handle a few questions, or when you're sick or whatever, something happens, you can't be there that night. You say, hey, would you just facilitate the group for me? And you kind of manage what it's like. But first you just start out by testing them out. You just test them out. Like just let them try it. I don't know. Somebody's going to be an upcoming worship leader. Don't make them be a worship leader. Let them just lead a worship set. Let them lead a practice and watch how they work. And like, oh yeah. I mean, that wasn't perfect, but that was 60-70% of what I expected myself. I can definitely help them get to 110, 120%. And then after you test them out, number 2, so number 1, test them out. Number 2, have what we call an I see in you conversation. I've learned this from other leaders, and it's one of my favorite techniques in leadership. I see in you. Hey, I see God raising up a worship leader in you. I see that. I see God raising up a worship leader in you, and I am so excited to see that that grow. I think God put that in you, and I wanna see you take that the distance. And there's a lot of times when I have an I see in you conversation, they were already feeling it. They're like, oh man, I was just like, I've been really convicted. I've been thinking I should try this. And I'm like, well, if I see it in you and God already told you about it, looks like you're ready for an interview. and by the way, that would be the next step would be interview. Don't just hand stuff to people. Give them an interview. At an interview, give clear verbal and written expectations. Give clear verbal and written expectations is number 3, or instructions. Yeah, I'm kind of making this 2 points, 1 point. So it's like give them clear verbal and written expectations, but also then instructions on what to do. I'm just assuming you interviewed them and you hired them, or appointed them. If they're not staff, appoint them, and then you're going to teach them the expectations in a written and verbal way that they can lead with something physical. Because why? Leadership is taking people someplace you're already going. And the people following you, they want to go where you're taking them really, really well. So you're going to give them something physical to review so they have clarity. Always give them clarity. And so they need to know what does success look like. They need to know who do they report to, how often do they report to that person. They need to know how much autonomy do they have versus how much do they need your permission to do stuff. They need a lot from you. So give them clarity on those issues. What's success look like? What's failure look like? Who do they report to? How often? How much autonomy do they have? How much oversight do they need? Do they check in with you weekly, daily, monthly, quarterly? Or only when they need help? And then, like I said, I do it, you watch. I do it, you help. You do it, I help. You do it, I watch. You do it, and then multiply. Help others do it. Always throw that multiply expectation in there. That just means you're going to help other people figure out how to do what you do. All right, last part of this. I hope that hope I haven't been going too fast. I feel like I'm talking a million miles per hour. But then number 4 is establish a clear feedback loop and communication strategy. Many leaders drop the ball here. I admit I've dropped the ball here a lot on the past. I'm trying really hard to become a way better leader, break through my ceiling of leadership, and this is something I have learned the hard way over the years. create a feedback loop and be organized. Don't make them be the feedback loop. You're going to take ownership, especially when you appoint somebody new. So how should they check in? You're going to give clarity. Should they check in with text, with email, with church center? Do you have a regular scheduled meeting? And you're going to make sure it's scheduled, not just rely on them in the early stages. When and how will you follow up with them? Create a feedback loop. And then what kind of review are you going to give them? Are you going to give them a written yearly review? Are you going to give them a quarterly review? Like how do they know if they're doing a good job? Look at our last episode on defining wins. And so do that and reassure them like, hey, like I want you to own this. I don't expect you to have it all figured out. And I'm going to check on you because I want to make sure you feel supported. My goal as your leader is to make you successful. Absolutely. 100%, 100,000%. Amen. My goal as a leader is to make you successful. And when you're a leader leading other leaders because you delegated to them, well, that's your goal. Like one of your top responsibility becomes their success, not just your tasks. Your next responsibility is the success of the leaders who you lead. And so what do? We need to delegate because delegating makes room. And what's beautiful about this is when you delegate and there's that empty space on your plate that used to be really full, you're gonna find pretty naturally, I think, or maybe God will bless you, or maybe you'll go have a retreat, and you're gonna find the next thing that will take your leadership to the next level. Quick story to end this is this podcast is actually the result of me delegating. I had a couple friends a couple years ago routinely tell me, Pastor, make a podcast, Pastor, make a podcast, Pastor, make a podcast, turn this stuff into podcasts. I had one leader rebuke me. He said, man, your leadership content is so good. Why would you just send this in written format? Why don't you do a podcast? And the reality is I just didn't have the margin to do this. And I couldn't even comprehend doing a podcast at the time because my plate was too full. And so over the years, I've become more streamlined and focused on certain things that are best suited for me while delegating things that are better suited for others. And now leadership is one of my top responsibilities. And so now my whole world is built around doing this podcast. Why? Because I've had wonderful people on my team who are happy to receive things I delegated to them so that I can do this. And they're joyful to take what I've given them. And they're joyful to see me do this new thing that I could never have thought of or figured out without the margin and without the skill of delegating. So what are we going to do? We are going to delegate. I've given you 4 ways to decide if you need to delegate. I've given you 4 ways to follow through and delegate. I tried to stay pretty close to the ground, but maybe some of it feels about 30,000 feet up. So do what you got to do. Ask the questions you got to ask. But that's it for today of today's episode of the 3-2-1 Leadership Podcast. Remember, leadership is taking people someplace you're already going. Take them to good places. Do it with clarity. Give them clarity because clarity is kindness. Keep finding the ceiling of your leadership. Let's break through it. And when we become better leaders, we might become a little bit more like Jesus along the way. All right. Peace out, my friends. Wrong camera. Peace out, my friends.